over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to try and convince you, or at least argue, that we've not really got our acts together when we talk about sustainable consumption. And most of this is not for a lack of trying, but arguably because we have subordinated our field to economics and other disciplines that don't necessarily help it too much. So my name is Louis Akenji. I have two colleagues here, Magnus Bengtsson and Chaisha, who are also going to be presenting at the conference. So I'd like to introduce you to my friend called Lucy. Is there a Lucy here? Uh-oh. All right. Well, we have a lot of gossip to talk. I know a lot about your life, Lucy, so you'll be quite interested. And as you can see, Lucy shops, right? So I imagine you shop, like everyone here. So I have a quick question. Who does not have a lifestyle? I like that. I like that. So this is really about Lucy is all of us here, right? And as you can see, Lucy has 2 kids. I don't know if that's true or not. Lucy has a husband, so technically that's 3 kids. And Lucy, like everyone, has, needs. And like Lucy, the question, I mean, if you take it from Shakespeare, the question used to be to be or not to be. We've sort of framed it in a modern day context to have or not to have. And now with this community, we're really trying to ask the question, is it to be or to have? Now, how does that relate to Lucy? Lucy thinks every now and then, well, when she buys Echo, it sort of helps the planet. But so she needs the dopamine, gets a quick hit every now and then to help out. But somewhere there's always this guilt. Like most of you, you ask yourself, am I really doing the right thing? Can I shop to save the world? Because she has this big thing behind her mind. At the same time, of course, we consume because we have needs. We need affection. We need freedom. We want to spend time with family and so on. This much, we have some degree of needs and desires which we want to meet. But to get there, we also have things in the way. Things like the economy, things like policy, things like infrastructure. These things facilitate how we meet these needs, how we go around about in society. So where are we now with this? Somewhere between meeting those needs, somewhere between actualizing those desires, is this whole model puddle that keeps us away from this thing that is constantly nagging us, the earth. And so, primarily what we've argued is that if you buy green, this is what I call green consumerism, then somewhere we will save the planet, or somewhere we'll save ourselves. It's not really saving the planet. But if you're a green consumer, this is just how overwhelmed you are. Somehow we've come up with awareness raising and eco labels, and we think if we flood everyone with this, things would automatically change. My argument is that instead of helping, we might actually somehow be doing a bit of harm. We're either postponing the opportunity to find solutions, or we're getting people locked into yet another crisis that is brewing down the road, right? So we worked for almost a year. I'm actually glad Marcus from Citra is here because we worked on this together and we all got depressed after. And so I'm going to help share the burden with you so you can get depressed too after this. I hope not. I just hope you get inspired to do something. And we came out with this report, 1.5 degree lifestyles. The whole idea is to try to link our way of living to the Paris Agreement, the aspirational target of 1.5, as you can see from the title of the report, by actually asking ourselves, how do you live, or what actions do you take that can help bring us to the 1.5 degrees in 50 years. So we look at something called the lifestyle carbon footprint, and this is the definition we use. Greenhouse gas emissions directly emitted and indirectly induced from household consumption, but excluding those induced by government consumption and capital formation. So you really cannot escape this. It's really about the impact of the way you are living. And quite often when calculations like this are done, carbon footprinting, it's territorial based. So it does not really calculate the impact of consumption. It just somehow a country very carefully carves itself out of the global economy and say this is just what is happening within our territory, and ignoring all what they're drawing from China and from my grandma in Cameroon and all of that. Yes, Alex, I'm trying to make you feel guilty about this. So now, how does this factor in? We look at what you call we calculate this, and between now and 2050, this is where we are now, and this is 2050. This is the amount of reduction that needs to happen. I would ask you to please focus on the green line there. Between now and 2050, this is the type of reduction that needs to happen. We are at 4.5 tons per capita per year, and we need to go down to 1 ton per capita per year, and we're calling it 3-2-1 by 2030, 2040, 2050. This is on an equity basis, so everyone globally, we calculate you're American, you're not entitled to more. You're from Sweden, you're not entitled to more. You have just as much as the guy from Ghana or the guy from Indonesia. So how does that apply to a few countries? So we also looked into a few examples of countries. We took the case of Finland and Japan, which are industrialized economies, and then China, Brazil, and India, which are developing countries. How does this apply to these countries? You can see now where Finland is. That's Marcos up there, 10.4 per year. That's Japan. Oh, okay, I'm the Japanese guy. So I really do look Japanese. That's where I am now. But we have a few colleagues here from India, Brazil, and China. And this is what it looks like. We talked about the 2030 target. We need to go down to 3 tons per person. That is the drop that is expected. It's 73 for Finland. If you look at it until 2050, it goes even deeper, almost 90% for Finland. This is the magnitude of the task in front of us. This is the urgency. So we effectively have 10 years to get somewhere here, and by 2040, we need to be here. Now, this, in the context of industrialized economies, it's very understandable for Finland and India and Japan and other EU countries. This is widely understood. But what we don't really take into consideration is that countries that still need to meet the basic needs of people, of millions of people, already need to start thinking about cuts. So this is really the challenge, the magnitude of the challenge we are facing right now. And so buying green is not really going to cut it, right? Or talking about recycling all the time is not going to cut it. Now, what is it that is causing all of this? We look at a few hotspots. And we look at food, mobility, housing, leisure, and all the different areas that you're very familiar with. But I'd like to talk a little bit more specifically here about food. You can see in here is the current demand, and I'm comparing Japan and Finland. But let's just focus on Finland for now. In here is the current demand, and just outside, the outer ring shows the impact. Meat is very obvious. Look at the amount of meat consumption, and look at the impact. So already there you see an opportunity where if you slash this, you've already cut a huge amount of the emissions. There are a few other things. If you compare Finland and Japan, here the cereal consumption is quite small in Japan, mostly because they love their rice. That's quite huge. And look at, I usually really like this part on beverage, because this is the booze, right? This is the alcohol. When the world is ending, you want to have a bottle by your side. And so, and the good thing is the impact of beverages is really, it's relatively small. So I should add here a little bit more. We're looking at emissions. We're not looking at, people use different indicators for this. And the little warning that should come with this is that you shouldn't really depend on that booze too much. Because if you look at the water footprint of alcohol, that is really, really high. So when you switch indicators, it suddenly starts telling a different story. But it remains, from looking at emissions, you can already see areas where we can start making cuts. Now, with the limits that we've imposed on ourselves using the 3-2-1 by 30, 40, 50, we all need to squeeze into these little triangles within this period. This is just another way of looking at that information. So what do the numbers in this report say? The very first one I already explained, that we need to cut down 2.5 tons, 1.4 tons, and 0.7 tons per person by 2030, 2040, and 2050. It is a matter of developed countries cutting by up to around 80%, and also some emerging economies already needing to think about cuts. And the key areas where we have opportunities for reduction are nutrition, housing, and mobility, which together are about 75% of the impact. And I'm going to try to run through this. What does this really say? What does this imply in what do the numbers here really tell us that we need to do? Here are a couple of things we should try to avoid. Quite often, we've just put it out on the consumer. This is why we say buy green. This is why we say awareness raising is going to help. And it is more daunting than that. There's a broader context around which consumption takes place. And I would beg that a group like this should start helping shift that narrative, that while individuals need to do something, we also need to do something about the context within which consumption takes place, the policies, the infrastructure, and so on. We're going to get to that a little bit more. But it also means that we need to start talking about giving up certain things. We can't have it all. Yesterday, we spent a really good amount of time talking about what it means to have your cake, to eat your cake and have it in different countries. I'm not going to translate some of the interpretations that came out. Some of it involves sitting on 2 seats with your you-know-what. But and you can't have it all, right? But we also need large, unprecedented amounts of capacity building. Reductions of about 80% are it's something we've not really thought about. We don't have organizations that have thought through very carefully what it means to change society that radically within such a short amount of time. And technology is obviously not going to fix it for us. But we need to start looking at the difference between individual actions. What can I do that makes a difference versus what structural change can also help me go even further or change the broader context of this. We all know about the attitude-behavior gaps. But one thing I also like to emphasize a lot is the kind of institutions we have now are not really ready for the challenge that is in front of us. Business models we have, all this tweaking around the peripheries is not going to help. But we also need to start finding solutions that are outside of the marketplace. We can't keep talking about just changing businesses. We need to start looking at opportunities that don't necessarily include financial exchanges or incentives. There's a couple of other ones. They're done. All right, so the small action trap. So a bit of bicycling is good, buying green is good. And somehow, I think some of you already know about what is called moral licensing. We think when we ride a bicycle, we've earned enough credit or eco-karma to fly to Hong Kong. That's really not true. So we give ourselves too much credit when it's not really due. And somehow we get trapped in these little changes and we think we've done a little bit, let others try. We need to avoid these small action traps and start thinking about really major experiments that can radically alter the landscape or the architecture that propagates consumption right now. And we already talked about the hotspots and the need to be brave. I wouldn't necessarily say I agreed with what was said yesterday, with everything that was said yesterday by Chandra, but I do think he was very right in saying we need to start getting very honest and brave in how we talk about this. Now, the question, if we say it's not all about the consumer, the question I usually like asking is, who then is it about? Who really has the power? And this is one thing that we've been dabbling with at the Institute for a while. But here are some of the things we're noticing, what I call a flattening of trends here. The gap between what we call consumption and production is shrinking. We're now looking at the prosumers, so to say. That's the new vocabulary that is emerging. Social trends and individualization. We know of mass customization in the market, for example. Ownership structures are dissipating. And we have a merging of online and offline living. So lots of trends are beginning to flatten. But realize that most of this is really how we are relating to the marketplace. It's not really about how we're going about living. It's almost just about consumption. And for most of you here, I know you're working on materials or water and so on. Quite typically, what we do is we look at material flows and we do life cycle analysis to look at environmental hotspots. But what I'm saying is this is not enough. While it tells you where the impact is or who is really doing what that is harmful, it doesn't necessarily tell you about where the power is, who can do something about the situation. So what if we can complement life cycle analysis or, with power flow analysis? How does it look like? This is the case of the simple plastic bag. There's a lot of talk about plastics nowadays. Ban plastics, do this and do that. But no one has really looked, is banning really the best solution here? Does it cause unintended consequences? Let's just try a bit of the mapping of the power flows here. You see lots of the big arrows show, the arrows show the direction of influence. The bigger ones show a stronger relationship. And while Lucy here has, as an end consumer, has a really strong influence on the brand owner also has over Lucy, the same relationship with the retailer. But if you look very carefully, this is where the lead actor is. This is the person. If you analyze the interest of the actor, the instruments that they have available to them, that's things like business associations and so on, and the types of influence that they have, this is called lobbying. So 3 things: interest, instruments, and influence. If you analyze those, you come out with a narrative like this that really clarifies where in the system do you have the power. What if instead of banning plastic bags here, you start pressing these people to alter the entire system within which packaging is done, or how people sort of carry their goods back home or procure their needs. So these are some of the little tweaks or the little thinking modifications that we need to have to really re-examine the system of production and consumption that is ahead of us. But it goes a little bit further than that, what I call the ring of lifestyles. In this case, it's just actually a realization that there are layers of influence, some of which we have a bit of control over, some of which we really do not. Right in here are those needs and desires. We have health, affection, the personal needs and desires are health, affection, identity, and so on. This is really what drives us, gets us out to go consume. But just a bit after that is your personal situation. How much do you earn? What are your physical abilities? How educated are you? What do your friends wear? Or what kind of cars do they drive? Do they drive cars at all? How old are you? Are you a man or a woman? These things are just a bit outside of, not necessarily wholly within your influence. And a bit further out is the socio-technical system. That is the infrastructure, what the media tells you, the politics and the policy, and the economy. All of this have stronger and stronger influences on how we consume. But part of the problem is that the operating system of society, the entire architecture, is put within the economy. So we actually allow the economy to dictate how we meet all these needs and desires. But what if we had to try to reframe this? And this is mostly what most of us are talking about within the sustainable consumption community. What this is causing is 3 key tensions that are sort of embedded within what we're calling within current consumption. There's nature over demand. So our resources are finite, but we're sort of screwing it up as if there's no tomorrow. There's a socioeconomic dichotomy. So different options, different levels of access and opportunities. There's an imbalance in the system. And there's a natural sink overload. We're creating more stuff than really can be absorbed by the natural system. So these are the tensions that we get when we have all our needs subsumed to the economy. Right? So this is what it leads us to, a Mad Max world, right? This crazy world where everyone has to fend for himself. But the discussion we're really having is how to reframe that. Instead of having the economy surround everything, we actually look at the boundaries, reposition the economy within the biophysical boundaries and have it predetermine the parameters with which we are meeting our needs. In this case, we make it the economy actually be of service and being limited by the natural by the natural system. Cultures, infrastructure, policies, media messages, and the economy all begin to get dictated by these limits that we have. Magnus, is that you
there
not?
There are natural boundaries here.
Okay, good. All right, so Magnus is one of my colleagues. He didn't like my message. So if we can reframe that, this is where it starts taking us to 3 key principles of sustainable living. The first one is living within ecological limits because, of course, we have planetary boundaries. The second one is ecological justice, so a sort of fairness in society where you meeting your needs doesn't really make it more difficult for me to meet my own needs, and where we all have opportunities. It doesn't necessarily mean we should all be the same, but we don't live as if other people don't need to live. And the last one is well-being. Not just individual well-being, which is what this is almost usually mischaracterized as, but societal well-being as well. And in some cases, if you're a fan of Aristotle, as I am, people actually argue that if you try to put the interests of the well-being of society ahead of the well-being of individuals, then what you do by default is you cater to the well-being of everybody. How do we go about, with all of that, how do we go about finding solutions? I'm not going to give, there are lots of you working on possibilities on solutions here, but I'm just going to talk about some parameters that we should keep in mind. What we do in the 1.5 degree report is we look at 3 key approaches to decarbonization of lifestyles. The first one is absolute reductions. In the cases of goods and services that we don't need, or physical amounts which are quite abusive to the planetary boundaries, we need to start cutting down. Take meat, for example. We need to cut down on the amount of meat consumption. The second one is efficiency improvements. This is where technology usually comes in. We take something that is highly inefficient and we make it a bit better. And the third one is modal shifts. So maybe instead of private car use, you're shifting to using public transportation or the train. And one thing we should be a bit more careful about when we're thinking about is the rebound effects or the lock-ins into a system that is not necessarily healthy. I don't think I need to go too deep into that. Everyone here understands that. But 2 key things to look at when we're talking about solutions are here. The first one is the intensity of consumption. How much impact does that have on the environment? And the second one is the amount of consumption. These are quite important because it starts telling you, is the action you're taking, does it actually have an impact, or is just something you feel is helping but it's not really going anywhere? Intensity and amount of consumption. So we look at a few options here from analyzing the literature. And here I'll just show you one quick example that looks at food, and in this case it's Finland. Look at the sort of savings we can get if we move to a vegan diet, but arguably that might be a bit tough. Look at the option of a vegetarian diet. But something that is a bit more interesting here I want to talk about is the adoption rate, what we call the adoption rate. Down here you see adoption of 15, 30, 65. The argument here is not everyone is going to become vegetarian, or maybe you don't even need to become fully vegetarian. The adoption rate, you could say, I eat meat once a month, or 20% of people eat meat once a month, or 50 people don't eat meat at all, and maybe another 20 eat very rarely. So the adoption rate here is quite critical when we're thinking of scaling solutions to a level that reflects the variety of society. We have lots of this in the report for food, mobility, and housing in the case of Japan and Finland. So 3 things here that are quite important if we're looking at large-scale transformation. The first one is what we usually, all of us are used to. This is where all the awareness raising and the government efforts and so on, consumer campaigns have led to. So I argue, however, that awareness raising is very important and it shapes attitude, but sometimes attitude is not enough, right? We need to go beyond that. We need to start thinking, what sort of facilitators, when you become aware, when you have a society that is aware, how do you translate that awareness into action? What sort of policies do you need? What kind of economy, what kind of an economy does someone who is aware live in comfortably without thinking he or she is trying to be good, while others are just wrecking the planet? What type of income do you need to live comfortably as against just being consumeristic? And what abilities do people actually need, and how do we make sure they get these abilities? The last one, of course, is the infrastructure. So, because, of course, if you're aware and you have the right attitude, but you don't have the right products, or you don't have the right infrastructure, a lack of public transportation, for example, a lack of alternatives to meat, for example, then you're simply not going to exist. So we need these three things to be in place to actually get Lucy to start living sustainably. Not only Lucy, but but everyone in society. So what can we as GRF or a community like this do? I've come up with a number of options. And the first one is really going back to around the 70s or the 80s, there's this discussion about environmental space. But we need to start thinking, what is a sustainable consumption space? What is that space within which, if you live your life, you can achieve well-being within planetary limits and in an equitable way? And what the 1.5 degrees report does is it starts to do the sort of calculations that can get us towards that. But we need to also start thinking about choice editing. Some of the older solutions, the older concepts that are on the table, we need to go revisit them. What do we have in society that is not helpful, that is just there as stuff? It's not helping us better as a society. It's not helping us be happier. Its pure function is just to generate income, and the impact on the planet is quite high. So we need to start coming out with an architecture for editing out those options. But we also need to go back to our research field and look at it very critically. We need to find methodologies of analyzing and research that do not subordinate the field to economics. The entirety of our field is not a sub-field of a sub-discipline of economics. And we need to start looking at out-of-market options here, like elderly care and so on, that do not necessarily include dealings with the monetary system, but facilitate a building of community. One thing we've been very good at is avoiding discussions around power. We don't look at the political economy of consumption. So we've just looked at, for example, the interest, the instruments, and the influence of brand owners on the system. We do not necessarily bring this analysis when we start talking about awareness raising. And until we start confronting those, it is going to be very difficult to see how much Lucy can influence or not influence the system. And we need lots of experiments, grassroots innovation, and lots of community initiatives that can be scaled. But also, going back to some of the solutions, to some of the things that are happening in society or in the past. I'm not glorifying all the things that have happened in the past. We all know that we don't want to go back to some decades or even centuries. Horrible things were happening. But there were also really good things that we're beginning to really get. And one of the things I'm beginning to observe is that when we talk about development or we talk about getting people out of poverty, what we're actually doing is moving them out of their communities into the formal economy. And after they start consuming, we start talking about moving them out of it again. This is a bit perverse, really. And we need to start thinking very carefully, what is it we have in our systems that we need to protect before these people start moving into this sort of consumeristic lifestyle. And with that, hopefully, we can really get a happy Lucy. So thank you very much.